This isn't the ice axe they were using in the Antarctic in 1911-1914, but the principle's the same. You dig it in and hang on when you're falling. You dig it in and hang on when you think you're being blown away. Most of us, when we think of the Antarctic, think of the big three, Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen. We should include Mawson and think of the big four.
Douglas Mawson had first been to the Antarctic with Shackleton in 1907 to 1909, and on his return to Australia, he was an Australian, he decided to mount his own expedition. The man he chose to film it was Frank Hurley, an enthusiastic young photographer from Sydney who had deeply impressed Mawson with his initiative and adaptability. The choice was an inspired one, and Hurley shot some of the very earliest and best action film ever taken in Antarctica. Sunshine and blizzard, triumph and disaster, Hurley filmed them all, often at great personal risk. The expedition ship was the Aurora, equipped with both steam and sail to meet all emergencies. Built in Dundee in 1876, she was still considered a staunch little vessel. And the seas she was going to sail would test her thoroughly. Hobart was the port of departure. From there, the plan was to sail south to Macquarie Island and set up a wireless station, the first ever in Antarctic waters. After Macquarie, the plan became sketchier. The expedition knew they were bound to meet dense pack ice, but that a way through or round must be found and a main base somehow established. After that, the Aurora would sail west and try to land one or even two more exploring parties, and thus help determine the extent of this vast, unexplored Antarctic continent. And just how this ambitious plan worked out is now told in Frank Hurley's pictures and the words of the expedition leader, Douglas Mawson.
Our ship, the Aurora, tied up at Queen's Wharf, Hobart, on the 4th of November, 1911. After a stormy voyage out from England, she had to be ready for sea again in less than a month. 4 p.m. on Saturday, 2nd of December, the hour set for our ceremonial departure. We were greatly honoured at this time by the reception of kind wishes from Queen Alexandra and from His Majesty the King. Proud of such universal sympathy and interest, we felt stimulated to greater exertions. Meanwhile, the citizens of Hobart, who had extended to us the greatest hospitality during our stay, now gave us the heartiest of send-offs. As we steamed downriver, we left behind memories of a land of strawberries and cream, as the younger members of the expedition had come to regard Tasmania. Gentle memories that would be recalled 1,000 times during the adventurous months that followed. And during that very night, the wind and sea rose steadily, till by dawn it had developed into a full gale. By dint of strenuous efforts and good seamanship, the captain and crew held their own, constantly tightening up the lashings and lending beef, a sailor's term for manpower, wherever required. And though most of us went through a stage of seasickness, it passed off in time. The wind increased from bad to worse, and great seas continued to rise, until their culmination on the morning of December the 5th, when one came aboard on the starboard quarter. Smashed half the bridge and carried it away. The officer on watch no doubt thought himself lucky in being at the time on the other half of the bridge. At last, 9 days after leaving the land of strawberries and cream, we reached the bleak and rocky shores of Macquarie Island, the first goal of our expedition. Seal hunters had till recently used the island as a base, but now most of these had gone, leaving the shore a graveyard for unwary mariners and a sanctuary for many thousands of penguins. Sea elephants, at one time found here in immense numbers, are now rare to the point of extinction because of the ruthless slaughter by the early seals. But the serious purpose of our visit to Macquarie Island was to set up the radio station and masts that would link our expedition in Antarctica with the outside world. The masts were of Oregon pine, each in 4 sections, and they had to be rafted ashore, winched up the hill, and erected. Sometimes the skua gulls fled from the scene of our labors, which re-echoed to orders shouted through megaphones and the sound of such popular choruses as a roving, to the strange of which our wireless station was at length completed. A landing place had been established at the head of a charming little boat harbour. The motor launch was got into good working order, and it then shuttled steadily to and fro between shore and ship. On Christmas Eve, 1911, we left Macquarie Island and the wireless party and headed south for the pack ice. There we planned to break through to the land, establish a main base, and then another western base. Ice on the starboard bow. The cry was raised at 4 p.m. on the 29th of December, 1911. Already we were steaming through untraveled waters. So few ships had ever navigated these seas that some 1.25 million square miles of ocean lay open to investigation. Land lay to the south beyond doubt. The problem was to reach it through the icebound sea. The pack grew heavier and the bergs more numerous, embattled in a formidable array. If an ideal picture, it spoke of a force all-powerful in whose grip puny ships might be locked for years, and the less fortunate received their last embrace. Orders came in quick succession to the 2 men at the wheel. Starboard, steady, and in a flash, hard a port, then repeated all over again. Vainly we peered ahead for a clear passage, while a swishing murmur, like the wind in the treetops, came from the great expanse. But, progress or no, our Greenland huskies had to be fed. They had suffered grievously during the storm, several dying of cold. But our stay on Macquarie had put fresh heart and voice into them. The great army of pack ice had been forcing us steadily westward, unable to find or force a way through. In the afternoon of January the 6th, the change in our fortunes occurred. There, on the port side, rose a massive barrier of ice. The question was this the seaward face of an ice-covered continent or just another immense iceberg? Rounding the corner, an El Dorado of open water lay before us, for the wind had cleared away the bergs, leaving a clear passage for us to steam up beside the great ice wall. At 11 p.m. on January the 6th, amid much jubilation on board, we entered a great bay. We had reached our goal, the vast unknown continent of Antarctica. Here the rock was so overwhelmed with ice as to be all but entirely hidden. But the sun shone gloriously as we stepped ashore, the first humans to set foot on the Antarctic continent within 2,000 miles. Since this bay and land had never before been sighted, all was now placed under the name of Adélie Land, the original inhabitants being duly titled Adélie penguins. The natives defended themselves most resolutely against our invasion, pecking at our hands and legs and chattering with an audacity which defied description, and which was taken up with a clamour upon all sides that was entirely deafening. The Adelies lay their eggs in November, at the start of the short Antarctic summer. By March, all have left the rookeries and gone away to sea. And long before then, in the few clement weeks left to us, we had to establish our own base in this home of the blizzard. The unloading of the Aurora therefore proceeded apace. But compared with the usual watering of ship, the hoisting on board of salt-free ice for drinking, this disembarkation was a truly vast undertaking. 2 complete living huts, a magnetic observatory, the whole of the wireless equipment, some 23 tons of coal briquettes, the 38 Greenland Huskies together with finest dog cake, and more than 2,000 packages containing sufficient food for the expedition for 2 years. All had to be unloaded onto the unwelcoming ice. While the dogs dozed in the warmth of the sun, the men worked almost non-stop for 72 hours. One of the most difficult and dangerous pieces of equipment to unload had been the aerial tractor sledge. The idea had been to bring an aeroplane to Australia for the purpose of drawing public attention to the expedition, since aviation was then almost unknown here. Thereafter, we planned to use it as a tractor sledge. However, after a bad crash, all ideas of flying were abandoned, the wings left behind in Australia, and the sledging role alone developed. But by January the 30th, we were celebrating a solider success, the completion of the fine hut that was to be our base and home for the next 2 years of Antarctic exploration. The Aurora had already sailed on from Commonwealth Bay on January the 19th, with instructions to establish another base as far west as possible before returning to Hobart. 8 men and 36 tons of stores had been successfully landed on the floating sea ice of the Shackleton Shelf, and here they planned to winter, while the Aurora returned to continue her oceanographic work. Steam had been laid on to the forward windlass, and as well as raising the anchor, it could now be used for manipulating the deep-sea dredging cable. Deep-sea dredgings were carried out at 11 stations, and at depths down to 1,800 fathoms, using the Monegasque trawl and regular tow nettings. Science is just as much interested in the greatest depths of the ocean as with the corresponding elevations of the land. For science is a whole, and if we ignore the facts contained in any one part of the world, we are hampering scientific advance. But such scientific musings are oft interrupted when sailing in the 50s and the roaring 40s. And if storm was tossing the Aurora at sea in the winter of 1912, the more so were bitter gales now sweeping the expedition's Antarctic base in Adelie Land, an area most truly christened the home of the blizzard. Soon the living hut was almost buried, and we came and went through a trapdoor in the roof. Day after day, the wind fluctuated between a gale and a hurricane, 80, 100 miles an hour. Nothing like it had been reported from any part of the world. None of us went out for the pleasure of it, but the scientific work required all too frequent journeys to the instruments at a distance from the living hut. Every day, in a torment of wind, we endangered life and limb in our struggle to record the results. The wind velocity meter and direction recorder had been set up on a rocky ridge to the east of the camp, the correct meteorological site. But in recording gusts of up to 150 miles an hour, many parts of the instruments had been broken and had to be replaced with stronger metal. Wood, too, was in time stripped bare of paint by the hurricane-driven particles of ice. The screens were securely anchored to the rock with phosphor bronze wire stays with a breaking strain of 1 ton. But, strong as these wires were, several breakages had to be replaced during the year. In driving snow, the scientists made their rounds by touch and the direction of the wind, against it going out, with it returning home. A fine sunny day. Pessimism vanished. I remarked in my diary, typical Antarctic weather, little knowing it would be hard to remember more than a dozen such days in a whole Antarctic year. Instead, imagine snowfalls so dense that daylight comes through but dully. The wind hurls screaming through space at 100 miles an hour, and the temperatures below 0. You have then the bare facts of living through the blizzards of a daily land. Stepping out of the shelter of the hut to collect glacier ice to melt for drinking water, one was apt to be immediately hurled bodily downwind. Even the strongest man would start sliding away unless his boots were equipped with steel spikes at least an inch long. We lost many ice-collecting boxes, too, for the problem was to ballast them sufficiently before the wind gained the ascendancy over container or collector or both. The suppression of outdoor occupations reacted in an outburst of indoor work, and the roar of the tempest was answered in flippant defiance by the music hall strains of the gramophone. Here, amid the tangle of hanging clothes and mitts, were light, rest, and warm bunks. At the heart of the living hut, the kitchen and stove, for the time being our idea of heaven. Inside the workshop, industry, endeavor, and achievement. Outside, the crude and naked elements of a primitive and desolate world. October the 21st, 1912. The long months of Antarctic winter are over, and the penguins are back to prove it. Five days of calm weather. It could scarcely be credited, yet spring came with such a spell. They gave us, for once, a vision of what perfect Antarctic days might be, and provided excellent opportunities for minor expeditions. The whaleboat had been torn loose from its moorings and been lost during one of the autumn storms. But we still had the motor launch for our voyages of discovery among the archipelago of ice-capped islets. Now seals slept on the floes, hardly bothering to stir, despite the noise of the launch's engine. In winter, we had seen them clamber out onto the ice, only to be rolled over and blown bodily back into the sea by the strength of the blizzard. The harsh contrast to this vision of the perfect day in Antarctica. The exploration of Adelie Land by sledging parties was regarded as of prime importance, and we resolved that a start must be made in November. The dog teams had been out on training runs around the base camp and were now ready for the off. The first man-hauling party got away on the 7th of November, and the other teams followed. Since our ship, the Aurora, was due to arrive early in January, the time left for exploration was slipping inexorably away from us. We had established an advanced base camp at the top of the coastal ice slope, and here most of the teams met up again for a final farewell. Here we had dug down into the ice, and hollowed out a chamber beneath the surface to provide a subterranean refuge. Although not as spacious as our base camp tunneling, it was still a great relief to be in a strong room with solid walls instead of the violently flapping tent. The blizzard was magically banished, and we christened it Aladdin's Cave. From here, various teams set out. First the western party, then the southern team, the eastern coastal party, and finally the far eastern party, the most ambitious of all, the group of which I, Douglas Mawson, was the leader, and of which Dr. Xavier Mertz and Lieutenant Ninnis, Royal Fusiliers, both of whom had acquitted themselves so ably throughout the expedition, were the other members. Both, moreover, had always been in charge of the dogs, and our plan was, assisted by the dog teams, to push out rapidly overland, mapping more distant sections of the coastline beyond the limit to which the man-hauling parties would be likely to reach. Such was our aim, and for the next 26 days, we adhered to it. Each evening, the dogs were fed with seal meat, good pullers, every one. Each morning, we harnessed up the dogs in fine fettle after all their training. The surface varied frequently, from rough rock to smooth snow, from crumpled ice to hidden crevasse. Over the 4 weeks, we covered over 300 miles, an average of some 12 or more miles a day. Each night we pitched camp. On December the 6th, 7th and 8th, a blizzard raged, the wind reaching 70 miles an hour. And though the laden sledge weighed many hundred pounds, yet it had to be securely anchored to stop it blowing away. On a fundamental fashion point, all were in agreement. Adélie was the country par excellence for the windproof Burberry gabardine. The material was light and loosely fitting, but in wind could be hermetically sealed. The trousers were of double thickness, and under the Burberrys, thick but light suits of Jaeger fleece were worn. Pitching camp in a blizzard took nearly an hour. Blocks of snow were cut and arranged in a semicircle. Our difficulties greatly increased by trying to stand upright on the ice in such a wind. Then, when one man had crawled inside the tent, the other two, at a given signal, attempted to raise it, while the man inside held on to the upwind pole and tried to kick the other poles into place, all in concert with the efforts of his colleagues outside. To lose or damage a tent in such a blizzard meant certain disaster, so snow, rocks, ice, food bags, all had to be swiftly heaped onto the tent valance to anchor it. It was always a great relief when the tent was at last safely up. The door of the tent was an oval funnel of Burberry material, just large enough to admit a man. And when all the riggers' party were safely within, a drawstring closed off the bitter world outside. Within awaited the comfort of reindeer skin sleeping bags and a hot supper of pemmican porridge. My diary for December the 6th reminds me that, for reading matter, Lieutenant Ninnis was not so badly off with a volume of Thackeray, but Xavier Mertz had come to the end of a small edition of Sherlock Holmes, and his only diversion was to recite passages from memory for our mutual benefit. Such the style of our life on Adélie Land, from mid-November till December the 14th, the day of our disaster. As we started our march that day, the weather was sunny, and everything for once in harmony. Then Mertz, who was leading, waved his ski stick to indicate something unusual, and I passed the signal back to Ninnis following behind me. Then Mert stopped, looking back, and I too turned round. Ninnis, his sledge, his team, all had vanished. I hastened back and came to a gaping hole where the covering of a crevasse had broken in. I leaned over and shouted into the dark depths below, but no sound came back. At 9 p.m., I read the burial service for Lieutenant Ninnis of the Royal Fusiliers, standing by the edge of the crevasse. With him had gone our best team of dogs and all our rations save a bare week and a half's worth. Between his grave and the safety of base camp lay nearly 300 miles, which it had taken us some 4 weeks to cover. After due resolve, we decided to return by the shorter inland route. December the 21st, the night march a miserable one. December the 25th, wished each other happier Christmases in future, and divided 2 scraps of biscuit. January the 4th, pitched tent. Mertz not well. January the 6th, Mertz not improving. Both our chances going now. January the 7th, no movement from my companion. My comrade had been accepted into the peace that passeth all understanding. Dr. Zave Mertz, a man of character, generous and noble. Reviewing the situation, I find I am now 100 miles from base camp. But it is easy to sleep on. The weather outside is cruel, and the food almost all gone. January the 11th, a beautiful calm day of sunshine, I set out. January the 17th, nothing to do but go on. January the 21st, very weak, I zigzagged on for only 3 miles. January the 31st, I reached Aladdin's cave. Soon the rocks around the winter quarters began to come into view, the base camp and wireless masts. I was in a dream, but what matter? 6 weeks after the death of Lieutenant Ninnis, the fearful journey was at an end. A terrible chapter in my life was finished. The long Antarctic winter was fast approaching, and we prepared to meet it with resolution. A resolution worthy of the sacrifice made by our 2 gallant comrades out here in the bitter home of the blizzard.